Hey y'all, Jamie here with Country Diggers. Today I thought I'd go into the history of the cast iron stove. And I'll be reading from encyclopedia.com. And if there's time, I'll read another article I found that's very interesting that goes along with it. And I have some cast iron pieces to show you too. Alright, let's get into it. These are my cast iron pieces. I found this owl right here in a dump. And I tried to super glue it, and it's got super glue over it. But you can see the notches right there where it sits. It's supposed to be like put your pan on it, I guess, like that. I'm not sure, but I think that's what that is. But that was a neat one. Very neat. And then I found this in a dump too. Now this, I figure, was a cast iron stove salt or pepper shaker. It could have been, I guess, because it's got the holes in the top. But it's a very tiny miniature right there. And then I got some of the big pieces. I think this is like a Griswold right here. I don't know what that would be used for with the cast iron. I'm not sure. The stove part, something. I'm not sure. And this one right here, I got, I'm not sure what that would go, piece that would go on the stove, but that's part of the cast iron stove too. And this cast iron plate. Skillet plate. And then I found, well, actually Tara found this leg right here. I mean, she didn't find it. Well, I guess she did. I'll give her credit. She ran the detector over it and told me to dig it out. So, so I'm the one who got it. But cast iron stove leg. And this one right here, I figured that's like it would have had a piece connected to it right here. And you just like connected the plate to it or something like that and put it in and out, you know, to put it in the oven and out the oven. That's what I'm thinking, but I'm not sure. But anyway, decorative piece right there. And as you'll see, there's different sizes and different decorations of it, of the cast iron stoves and all their pieces. And they're very nice looking. Hopefully, I'll get enough one day to build me a cast iron stove. I don't know, I might. And also, you know, when I metal detect, now Tara detected that one, but I detected this one and this one and this one right here, and the rest I found in the dump. But when you metal detect, and I do it on non-discrimination all the time. Because you never know what you'll dig up. If you're looking for relics, you want to put it on everything. You want to non-discriminate on everything because you never know. Alright. The cast iron cook stove, a constructed range that totally encases the fire, is a relatively recent development in the history of cookery, and an outgrowth of earlier cooking devices made of stone, brick, clay, and tile. The English term stove has a history of its own and has been used for centuries to designate a variety of early cooking devices in which the fire was not enclosed. Excuse me. For example, one precursor to the cook stove involved a raised hearth, which, like the later ranges, was waist high, but supported open fires. These, along with structures for partially enclosed fires and portable blazers called stoves, are helpful in tracing the origins of what was to become the 19th century's cast iron cook stove. The early history, for thousands of years before the advent of cook stoves, people cooked over open flames, depending on materials and technologies at hand. Various cultures have worked out a cooking surface heated by a fire below. These are exemplified by the Russian domed clay stove and the Japanese kamado. Some had holes in the cooking surface to bring cooking pots into direct contact with the flames. Their open fires were easily tended but smoky and somewhat inefficient. More advanced early cultures, among them the Chinese Han Dynasty, used the ceramic tasso, a very early range in which the fire was enclosed. The late medieval period and the Renaissance brought many changes because of the greater use of iron. Excuse me. With the growth of cities and consolidation of power, there was a trend towards elaborate cuisines and large kitchens. Commercial establishments and wealthy or aristocratic households having more means and more need were the first to explore various types of stoves. The stew stove, one of these cook stove progenitors, was a bank or roll of open top or grill-like burners, each over its own fire. Its role in the kitchen was an adjacent to the large roasting fireplaces. For example, the stew stoves of 16th century Italian chef Scapi were made of brick and clay. Those of his contemporaries were often made of tile or stone. In such stoves, the fire was not totally enclosed, but they offered individually regulated temperatures and a waist-high surface. In later centuries, this form was sometimes adapted to quantity cookery, using permanently installed large cast iron or copper kettles, each over their own fireboxes and used for the preparation of substantial stews and soups. The German architect and engineer Georg Andreas Blocher designated a brick range that followed this principle in Frankfurt 1666. Subsequently, others devised cast iron frames and fireboxes, like Scampi stoves. They were usually limited to professional kitchens. Renaissance ironworkers built on smelting and casting innovations of the medieval period and developed cast iron stoves. Blocher's Fernagel, or The Art of Domestic Stoves, discovered such a stove, one that produced coals to be used in a fireplace and another with horizontal surface for household cooking. Subsequently, the English Industrial Revolution improved blast furnaces, increased production, and popularized iron stoves on both professional and industrial cookery and in privileged households. For example, Denis Diderot recorded their use by French candy makers in his Encyclopedia 1758. Northern Europeans, especially Germans and Scandinavians, had stoves early, possibly as response to their cold winters. In England, they were sometimes installed alongside the grate system, used as freestanding ranges and sometimes employed steam, ultimately developing into the English institution, the AGA stove. The American cook stove. Cook stoves were not new to the colonies. Mary Randolph suggested a brick version, probably a stew stove, in 1824. By the end of the 1700s, early American scientists such as Benjamin Franklin and Count Rumford had worked out further ideas leading to the development of home cook stoves. In the early 1800s, New Yorker Jordan Mott manufactured the first American stove. Supplementary adjacents to the traditional hearth. At first quite small in size, they were placed freestanding in front of the fireplace. There are stovepipes carrying the smoke to the fireplace chimney. As they became larger and more complex, they usurped the hearth entirely and were installed directly within the fireplace. The antebellum period brought many cook stove innovations. Among them, expanded surface area, multiple lids, dual ovens, warming ovens or shelves, additional storage places, and water boiler shelves. By 1850, most urban middle-class hearths had given way to stoves. The changeover was uneven, slower to reach the lower economic levels and more remote areas. The cook stove itself demanded new designs for pots and pans. Age-old legs and rounded bottoms, so workable on the hearth, were no longer effective and were replaced by flat bottoms that could absorb heat by direct contact with the heated surface. A few boiling kettles retained the rounded bottom and short legs to prevent tipping, and were set into an open lid hole, the hottest setting possible. Others were further redesigned with bottom insets that fit down inside the open lid, the eye. Trade catalogs of the mid to late 19th century continued to reflect a period of hearth stove overlap and supplied cooking utensils for both. With increasing specialization, stovetop equipment expanded to include such adaptations as saucepans, boilers, kettles, skillets, pancake and waffle irons, coffee roasters, toasters, and short-handed utensils. How they worked. The workings and maintenance of cook stoves were demanding. Between the firebox and the chimney, a series of manual dampers and levers controlled the air and smoke flow, the rate of burning, and consequently the cooking temperatures. The fire was lit with all dampers open, after which adjustments redirected the heat and smoke to a passageway surrounding the oven to heat it. As the ovens were without self-regulating thermostats, overheating was prevented by opening oven doors temporarily, cutting down on the fire's airflow. To maintain temperature, the cook checked the relatively small firebox, testing for heat by hand, and stroked it frequently. Such instructions on cook stove management were included in 19th century cookbooks. Cooling temperatures were often controlled by the position of the pot on the stovetop. The area nearest the firebox was by far the hottest. The furthest corners were the coolest. As the oven was hottest near the wall between the firebox and the oven, one used the furthest side of the oven and turned the pans regularly. rather than positioning the shelves. Cook stoves were notoriously eccentric. A good cook learned their vagaries and adapted. There was now more choice in fuel. Hardwoods were preferred over soft, as always, as they created more heat and lasted longer. Coal was preferred to wood in that it produced more heat for a longer period of time and was easier to procure and handle in urban kitchens. But it triggered debates over possible danger from its fumes. General assessment. Cast iron cook stoves brought about a major revolution in many aspects of cookery, notably the technology of the kitchen, the character of cuisine, and the role of home cooks. The new ranges influenced cooking technology throughout the Western world. In cultures that had little iron, the designs of cast iron stoves were applied to newer versions of their earlier traditional stoves. For example, the Russian dome stove evolved into a clay-covered brick bank stove, at first used by the upper classes, and eventually adopted into peasant homes. The Alsatian brick cook stove, and the Bavarian stone and tile stove followed a similar pattern. The attraction of new stoves overcame their shortcomings. Cooks benefited from waist-high flexible cooking, less bending and lifting, less smoke, and no ash in food. Their ovens achieved and maintained desired temperatures in far less time, enabling daily baking and permitted more flexible menus. They heated the house more efficiently in winter and were easily taken apart and reassembled in summer kitchens. However, in comparison with hearth cooking, they did not roast or bake well, were notoriously drafty and finicky, and required arduous cleaning. Some decried the loss of the hearth, declaring that the center of family life was threatened, and with it the family itself. The cook stove had far-reaching effects on cookery and the domestic life of 19th century men and women. Well suited to city life and the growing cash economy, it eliminated the task of producing one's own fuel. Women, now changing their role from farm producer to city consumer, enjoyed the convenience and used their growing discretionary time for philanthropic community welfare. Growing interest in fashionable dining likewise stimulated a far wider range of daily cooking and baking. Simultaneously, a drop in the cost of sugar, flour, and spices led to elaborate home baking, candy making, preserving, and canning, and the consumption of snack foods. The gradual development of chemical leaveners, well adapted to the quickly fired cook stove, replaced much yeast baking and encouraged new and revised recipes, especially for quick breads and iced layer cakes. Alright, hope y'all enjoyed that. I will do a part 2 of that article I said was interesting. It's still on the cast iron, but it's an article on miniature toy cast irons, and it's a very interesting article. All right, hope you enjoyed.